So this new trailer for Dragon's Dogma 2 came out, and you know, it looks pretty cool. Capcom's really outdone themselves this time. Seriously though, what is this gameplay? I mean, I think I'm about it, but this is such a far cry from what we're used to seeing with Final Fantasy games. I get more of a medieval Kingdom Come Deliverance vibe from all this, rather than a tried and true Final Fantasy game. Whether that's a good or bad thing remains to be seen. Let's just go ahead and get into the trailer and see if we can't figure out what kind of direction Square is taking with their Star franchise. So taking a closer look at the footage, we see some characters sitting around a bonfire near the beginning of the trailer, and they have a target that's apparently named Shiva's Dominant. When one of the characters states that their kind do not question orders, we see what I think is the protagonist of Final Fantasy XVI touch a symbol on his face. We'll get to why I think he's the protagonist in a little bit. Anyway, so our protagonist is going to be Joshua's sworn protector. Notably, he doesn't have a symbol on his face at this point, and he has some sort of ties with nobility. Must be some kind of knight if he's trusted with protecting Joshua. Later in the trailer, we find out that Joshua can turn into freaking Ifrit, and things just get totally out of hand, and Joshua goes out of control, just ripping people's heads off. I mean, does Joshua really need any protection here? So our protagonist, now out of a job, gets himself a tattoo and grows longer hair and calls it a day. Okay, in all seriousness, let's take a look at the beginning of the trailer here. We see our protagonist staring into the flames of the bonfire with a somewhat sad, if not reminiscent look on his face. Again, their target is stated to be Shiva's Dominant, who apparently is a young girl. Knowing that Joshua once transformed into Ifrit, why couldn't this girl do the same thing? In 16, summons seem to be withheld within people, which is why she's called Shiva's Dominant. Maybe out of guilt for being unable to save Joshua, our protagonist joins this anti-crystal faction to prevent the same thing that happened with Joshua from happening ever again. This is supported by the end of the trailer with the protagonist's voice declaring, "The legacy of the crystals has shaped our history for long enough." You can also see that they both have that earring on their right ear, which is more of an indication of why I think it's the same person. Then again, maybe they just both like wearing their earrings on their right ear. Who knows? But I think if I'm right, it could be an interesting plotline for the next Final Fantasy, at least for our protagonist. However, I am a little worried as to how the story in general is going to play out, because I feel like we've been through this whole crystal this, crystal that fiasco so many times now. 16 times, in fact. If they do end up putting an interesting spin on the whole crystal situation, then I'm on board. If they don't, Square just doesn't even know what they're doing with Final Fantasy at this point. Alright, let's get to the most intriguing part to me, the gameplay itself. So this looks like action combat out the wazoo, Devil May Cry, eat your heart out. I can't say whether I like it or not yet. I feel like they already had figured out action combat with 7 Remake's gameplay, and this doesn't look to be all too similar. I'm actually a bit worried as to how it's gonna work, but seems like our protagonist has a variety of interesting tools to use at his arsenal. Obviously, he's gotta have a sword. I mean, come on, it's Final Fantasy. The interesting part comes into play as we see him summoning arms and weaponry out of thin air. In one part, we see him throw an enemy into the air with phoenix wings, then double jump and start air juggling Devil May Cry style. Now cut to a shot of him gut punching with what looks like Alexander's or Titan's arms. So I guess our protagonist has a variety of summons to use at his disposal during combat, but can only summon specific parts of those summons at any given moment. It's hard to say, but I'm willing to bet it's going to play out very similarly to Devil May Cry's combat, and probably won't go the 7 Remake route of ATB gauges. The game will have both Naoki Yoshida as the producer and Hiroshi Takai as the director of Final Fantasy XVI. These guys worked on Final Fantasy XIV, so if 16 was up your alley, then you're probably gonna like this game. As for those that didn't, you still have a chance. 14 was an MMO, so they had to take an entirely different route going into it, and overall I think they did a good job rehauling 14 1.0, which was terrible, into A Realm Reborn. But I also think that was pretty bad, to be fair, but 1.0 was apparently much worse. All in all, I am skeptically excited for Final Fantasy XVI. All I can say is at least Nomura isn't directing it, which is already a step in the right direction. What did you all think of the trailer? Let me know down in the comments below if you think I'm right about the two characters introduced being one and the same. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Regardless, guys, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button, or, like I said in my last video, Final Fantasy XVI might suck. You don't want to take that risk, guys.